Mysteries of the Ottoman Sultan's Palace. The Ottoman Empire was a traditional and open society. It should be mentioned that the concept of harems was not originated by the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans were the most recent in a long line of Mesopotamian rulers, and they carried on their predecessors' customs. There were very few civil wars or other major internal conflicts during the empire's unusually long lifespan. One major factor in this was imperial harem and the regulations that apply to it. We cover everything, from prehistoric humanity to the present, so like and subscribe to A Day in History to stay up to date on our new films. Osman I founded the Ottoman Empire in the 13th century. The historic metropolis of Constantinople would soon fall to the Ottomans, who gained territory and power and took Osman's name through Anglicization and some linguistic hopping. This would result in an inflow of Greek and Roman culture, which served as the Byzantines' foundation. The Ottoman Empire extended greatly and had an impact on every part of the empire, including the imperial harem. The imperial harem must be specifically mentioned because the term harem can apply to women's living quarters in any Turkish home, not just the sultan's. The seclusion and opulence of a harem betrayed the man's wealth. In fact, a man's ability to maintain a maximum of 4 wives was meant to represent the limit on the number of wives he may have. Not just wives, but also concubines and female relatives would be found in a harem. The harem was also home to young children of both sexes and female slaves. When the Ottoman Empire first began, the harem's sole purpose was to support the Osman imperial line, specifically the patrilineal descent from the first emperor, as well as his wives and concubines. It was a fight for the succession that would determine who would be worthy of the throne, and all of their protectors and servants were there to ensure that the Sultan had many sons. To keep the Ottoman family tree largely vertical and to avert civil conflicts, a new sultan's brothers would be assassinated at his coronation. The imperial harem had a hierarchy that was strictly enforced. The mother of the current sultan, the Valide Sultan, held authority over the harem. Her authority would sometimes extend out of the harem into the empire's politics, but legally her power ended at the harem's border. The women immediately below the Valide Sultan were the sultan's daughters. The imperial harem had a hierarchy that was strictly enforced. The mother of the current sultan, the Valide Sultan, held authority over the harem. Her authority would sometimes extend out of the harem into the empire's politics, but legally her power ended at the harem's border. The women immediately below the Valide Sultan were the sultan's daughters. These princesses were prized for their ability to influence political decisions, which led to their marriage to a princess with royal ancestry. Another factor contributing to the dynasty's relative stability was the fact that even a royal wife could not bear royal children because the Ottomans exercised patriarchal power transfer. The sultan's concubines were a different set of ladies with their own lower social class. The concubines' relationships with the sultan determined their status, money, and standing. The lowest class, servants to the wealthy, were those who never attracted his notice. The women who had visited the sultan's bed but had not given birth came next. It's important to remember that a concubine or wife of an emperor could only bear him one male kid during the start of the Ottoman Empire. She would cease visiting his bed after that. This was done to avoid a rivalry between two boys vying for their mother's hand in the crown. The lowest class, servants to the wealthy, were those who never attracted his notice. The women who had visited the Sultan's bed but had not given birth came next. It's important to remember that a concubine or wife of an emperor could only bear him one male kid during the start of the Ottoman Empire. She would cease visiting his bed after that. This was done to avoid a rivalry between two boys vying for their mother's hand in the crown. The 4 cadens that the Sultan had were those he regarded as his favorites. The oldest or most senior of the cadens, the Baskadin, is one of them. Women ascended this hierarchy and acquired greater power, wealth, and housing. This leads us to a sad and unpleasant fact about the Ottoman Empire. The bulk of a sultan's harem would be made up of slaves from various locations and, despite the fact that they are by no means the only political institution to profit from state-sanctioned slavery. If they were deemed attractive or gifted enough, slave females from outside the empire would be sent to live in the imperial harem. Frequently, the Sultan received them as presents from influential figures. Before entering the harem, a girl or lady would receive instruction in Islamic principles, court etiquette, and the harem's customary organization. The names they were given were usually a reflection of their personality or physical attributes, and those who were not aware of their previous names were taught Turkish. The majority would be slaves, but some would rise to become cadens and legitimate sultans. Not only did slavery affect women, though. In the imperial harem, men were also held as slaves and used as labor. But it did mean taking a few more steps. The eunuchs were the only men allowed inside the harem, aside from the Sultan and his sons. Due to their origins, eunuchs were divided into 2 categories, black and white. The black eunuchs, yes, there were skin color-based groups, had a single set of responsibilities and were even castrated in a particular manner. Since the European eunuchs arrived in the Ottoman Empire later in life than the male African slaves, they were assigned distinct tasks and underwent distinct castration practices. Due to their castration technique, which made it extremely difficult for them to develop any kind of contact with the women, the Kisla Aga, the black eunuchs were frequently assigned responsibilities more closely associated with the harem. The eunuchs were the only men allowed inside the harem, aside from the Sultan and his sons. Due to their origins, eunuchs were divided into 2 categories, black and white. The black eunuchs, yes, there were skin color-based groups, had a single set of responsibilities and were even castrated in a particular manner. Since the European eunuchs arrived in the Ottoman Empire later in life than the male African slaves, they were assigned distinct tasks and underwent distinct castration practices. Due to their castration technique, which made it extremely difficult for them to develop any kind of contact with the women, the Kisla Aga, the black eunuchs were frequently assigned responsibilities more closely associated with the harem. Additionally, the Sultan had tight working relationships with the Topkapi Aga, the black and white chief eunuchs, respectively, who possessed considerable political clout in the court. The chief eunuchs would get embroiled in a number of court scandals and, most all, the rule of women, a period of history that we believe is also known as Mommy Says. Kedinler Sultanate, the Turkish term for the reign of women, began with Suleiman the Magnificent and his consort Harem. Harem was a slave who came from what is now modern-day Ukraine. She was thought to have significant influence over Suleiman because she was the only concubine to marry the Sultan and was exceptionally intelligent, fascinating, and gifted. Harem would bear the Sultan 4 boys, and Suleiman would only have children from Harem after the birth of her first son. She persuaded the Sultan to relocate to a newer edifice, changing the harems and the palace's power structures. From that point on, the Ottoman Empire, housed in the recently constructed Topkapi Palace, had a succession of youthful and inexperienced sultans. Compared to earlier sultans, these ones would be far more pushed and tugged by harem and palace intrigue. Compared to their predecessors, the new sultans would spend more time in the palace and harem, stop enlarging the Ottoman Empire, and concentrate on domestic concerns. The custom of executing the brothers of a sultan upon his ascension was substituted with an eternal detention next to the harem. So while it may not be quite isolation and suffering, a cage is nonetheless a cage. The royal family as a whole would eventually withdraw within the royal palace. The harem's population grew to comparatively vast proportions. Grand viziers, top eunuchs, and valid sultans engaged in a back-and-forth struggle for subtly controlling the sultan's ear. Kandilur Sultanate ruled from the beginning of Suleiman's reign in the early 1500s to nearly the end of the 1600s. Even though it would have less power over empire affairs, the imperial harem would endure as long as the Ottoman Empire did. The Ottomans lost land and authority throughout the course of the following 2 centuries, and when they sided with the Kaiser during World War I, they were defeated. The Ottoman Empire would fall and be replaced by the Republic of Turkey following the war. The tale of the Sultan's harem is the tale of the Ottomans, who are inextricably linked to the empire to the point where one narrative cannot be completed without the other. Even though they held positions of subordination to their male counterparts, Ottoman women were nevertheless able to influence and wield control over the state's highest authority. Enslaved and gathered from great distances, the harem's concubines would provide the empire with new rulers and hold their own court, isolated from the outer world by law. There were many highs and lows for the Ottomans. Although their history was marred by the practice of slavery and mutilation, they established a stable government that went on to capture one of the finest cities ever built as well as a sizable portion of the ancient globe. There's nothing like demolishing the all-male fantasy to highlight the complexity of historical events. We appreciate your time, and we invite you to check out our other films where we discuss other unexpected historical events.